I custom built this griddle to fit on my barbecue. I love grilling and cookouts, and one of my favorite things to do is burgers, specifically smash burgers, which work better on a flat surface griddle than it does on grill bars. The whole thing was built for about $14 worth of steel, one sheet that I got at a metal supply store near my house, and I just cut it up and welded it. I'm going to walk you through some of the steps of how I did this. Most videos that some of you may have seen me in before are much better shot and edited, so please bear with me. I'm doing the entire thing myself on my cell phone and my home computer. I wanted the griddle to fit perfectly where the regular barbecue grill plates sit, so I used one of them as my size guide. Measuring against it for length, I drew out lines to make a box about 1.5 inches tall. The large piece in between the lines on either side will become the main cooking surface. Using an angle grinder, I carefully cut out all of the pieces for the box. After this shot, I used a clamp to hold the metal plate down as I cut. I also put on gloves. On my belt sander, I took down all of the sharp edges left by the angle grinder on all of the pieces of the box. If I didn't have a belt sander, I could have used a file or just some regular sandpaper wrapped around a block of wood. After verifying that all of the pieces were the right size once they were put together, I tack welded the 4 sides into a box shape. Once all 4 sides were tack welded, I made sure the box was squared up and I welded it more permanently. I wanted my burger griddle to have a grease trough, so I cut 2 more pieces of steel the width of the grill panel and welded them into a V shape. I could have used a piece of angle iron for this, but I didn't want to have to buy more pieces of steel when this one had extra. I then tack welded them onto the main griddle plate. After my first tack weld, I realized I was off by just a hair, so I broke the welds and re-tacked it in the right spot. With the griddle plate and trough tacked together, I fit them into the rectangular frame. I didn't show it on camera, but I had to grind down some of the welding lines in the corners of the frame to make it fit. After checking that it was at the slightly sloped angle toward the trough that I wanted, I tack welded it in several places all around the edge. Welding long lines can heat and warp the steel plate, so it's important to use the tack welds to prevent it from moving when you want to do the finishing welds. Once it was tacked and I checked that everything was where I wanted it to be, I did the final welds all around the edges, including the connection between the main plate and the trough. I even added some additional welds on the underside, which may have been overkill, but I wanted to prevent any grease from leaking down through the gaps, and I'm not a professional welder. Speaking of not being a professional welder, I had a good bit of cleanup to do. Using a grinding wheel, I took down my unsightly welds to a more manageable level, especially at the plate to trough transition. The steel I was using had a lot of mill scale, and I wanted to bring out the clean steel, so I used a flap disc attachment to sand it. I ended up using the grinding attachment to take it down first, and the flap disc to smooth everything out. Next, I hit it with some hand sanding to even it out a bit more. I'm not sure if this step was all that helpful because I decided that a sandblasted finish might be better. It's pretty hard to film well inside a sandblaster, but after I was finished, the whole cooking surface was a nice flat gray. I put the whole thing in my oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for about half an hour before pulling it out of the oven, adding a very thin coat of grapeseed oil, and then back in the oven at 500 degrees for about an hour. In this clip, I'm adding the second layer, and I ended up doing 3 total. Not all my tools needed to be custom made, so I did buy some to help out. A nice, sturdy spatula, good for flipping and any mid-cook smashing that's needed. A burger smashing tool with a flat surface and a strong handle. Some parchment paper squares to stop the burger smasher from sticking to the meat. And a melting dome to help perfectly melt that cheese. All that's ready, so it's time to give it a test run. As you can see, the burgers smash beautifully. This particular burger stuck more than most of them, but even with that, you can see the delicious result. Overall, I am super happy with how this thing turned out. It's a project where lots of things could have gone wrong, but really none of them did. Hopefully, I'll have more cool projects for you to see in the future. If you want to see some of those, please consider subscribing.